everybody. We got a great one today, for a change. And this time I mean it, because we have one of my favorite guests, Frank Foer of the Atlantic Monthly, and author of a new, very important book, in my estimation, The Last Politician, a chronicle of the first 2 years of the Biden presidency. Throughout the last politician, you get sort of a blow-by-blow picture of how Biden approaches the office that he sought 3 times. And this is not the Sleepy Joe caricature that Fox News and the others try to create. It's quite the opposite. This is a guy with strengths and weaknesses. But what emerges in this book is a fully engaged president who brings it every day, and with his understanding and mastery of how the government works, and got so much done. Inheriting a government that had no plan for getting the COVID vaccine into people's arms. The Biden team does that, so that within 6 months you get the shot at your pharmacist. That was a victory for technocracy, something that's a theme in The Last Politician, and something that you certainly wouldn't associate with the Trump administration. Remember that Trump, in his first 2 years, had the House and the Senate and couldn't get an infrastructure bill done. Every week was infrastructure week, and it just never happened. Biden got the largest infrastructure package through since Eisenhower built the interstate highway system. Chips, our huge investment in semiconductor manufacturing, focused on our national security. We're relying on China for our semiconductors, and on manufacturing and working class and middle class jobs and investment in science. And the Inflation Reduction Act, a nearly $400 billion investment in addressing climate change, which is, kind of important. And I'm out here in Los Angeles right now. I was out here for my granddaughter's 7th birthday, and I don't know what we're leaving them. So that is important. Now, despite these achievements, Joe Biden is now in a dead heat with a guy who he beat in 2020. And has been indicted now 4 times, as you know, on 91 charges. There's reasons for that. Inflation, Biden's age, a legitimate question. And we discussed some of the bullshit that people see in professional politicians and in someone who is the last politician. This election could not be more important. Both Trump and Biden will go into this race somewhat diminished. And that's why this book is so important, because the caricature of Joe Biden that Fox and the others have created could not be further from the truth. That's why I want you to listen to this one with Frank Foer, because it is an important one, for a change. Well, The Last Politician was in the New York Times today on a story. Was it today? It was on Bidenomics.
Yeah, that's right. It was in David Leonhardt's newsletter that gets published every morning. And he referenced my book and how it tells a story about the transformation of democratic policy on trade, on unions, etc. The point is that Bidenomics, which is this super banal word when it's plastered against the backdrop of Biden's stump speeches, is actually something of ideological, paradigmatic significance. Did you think that we would be a minute and 13 in and we'd get to paradigmatic?
Yeah, well, I was counting on that. One of the things about your book, and let's talk about Bidenomics, and they mentioned the National Security Advisor in this in Leonhardt's thing today, who wouldn't think of as a convert to liberalism or to leftyism on economics. But that is the transition that Biden has made. And I don't know if the American people see it.
No, they probably don't. I mean, it's one of the most frustrating things about this administration is that it's done so many things well that the public just is basically indifferent to.
Well, like the COVID response was masterful, and people don't want to talk about COVID, basically, right?
Well, I was when I wrote that, I was thinking about that clip that you did when you were senator talking about the role of government, and you went through and you kind of brilliantly explained all these ways in which your wife's Franny's family has benefited from government over time, and you had this very sweeping narrative. And I thought about the vaccine, and the vaccine is really one of the most incredible things government has ever done. I'm starting with Operation Warp Speed, but when the Biden people came in, within 6 months, they came up with a plan and a system that made it so that you could walk into your neighborhood CVS and you could get a shot that would save your life. And it was executed so seamlessly, so well that the public never really appreciated it. And I guess in a way, writing this book, which for me was kind of a tonic after Trump, where I wasn't writing about a guy advising the country to ingest bleach, who flushed documents down the toilet. I was writing a book about governing and the actual stuff of governing. And one of my goals was to try to make the government and the act of governing as tense, as sexy, as interesting as I think it deserves to be.
Oh, it's sexy, man.
All right, now you're mocking.
Yeah.
I tried to tart it up.
But still, well, you talk about technocracy in this as if, and I've heard some people use that as a bad word, but it's a good word because, well, for example, on COVID, you're right. The Operation Warp Speed was a Trump administration policy, and to develop the vaccine as fast as possible. Of course you would, right? Of course you would. But they weren't distributing it.
They had no plan to get shots in arms. I tracked the story of a woman called Natalie Quillian, who is one of these people who never makes headlines. She was the deputy campaign manager. And then after the campaign, which was this grinding thing, they said, oh, by the way, you're going to be the deputy on the COVID response. And so Biden wins in the Electoral College. AP gives them the victory. The transition, the formal act of the new administration coming in and learning about the old one, it begins because there's a law that says it needed to begin. And she goes around the bureaucracy basically asking, like, where is the plan to put these shots in arms? And they ask at Health and Human Services, at the Department of Defense, and they keep asking. And at a certain point, she comes to the conclusion, well, they just never had a plan for getting the shots in arms. They never had the plan for ramping up the manufacturing of the vaccine so that it would happen quickly enough.
Weren't they having some dispute with Pfizer or Trump didn't
Yeah, exactly.
Something?
Pfizer was one of the few companies that didn't take Operation Warp Speed money. And so Alex Azar, Trump's HHS secretary, and Trump himself kind of took it out on Pfizer that they weren't playing ball. And then Pfizer announced the vaccine test results right after the election. And Trump was convinced that Pfizer was conspiring to screw him with the election, that if Pfizer had announced those results earlier, Trump would have won. And so they were just reluctant to give Pfizer everything that it needed in order to quickly ramp up production.
So are you saying that Trump tends toward being paranoid in some way?
I would never accuse him of being petulant, vindictive, paranoid. No, those would be totally out of character.
Okay, good. Because we don't do that here.
No, we keep it at a high level. I've been on the show enough to know that it's a very rare.
Yes, you have. You've been on 5-6 times, something like that. Since we're talking about Bidenomics, and the name of the book is or the title is The Last Politician, you can't get into any of this without talking about politics. And he's running in his last election. He came to the Senate. He was elected at 29, comes in at 30 after the tragic death of his wife and daughter. Now he's older and running his last election. It seems to me that he's not getting credit for much of anything. We haven't gone through these, but you have the Recovery Act.
Yes.
Okay. You have the infrastructure bill. This is the largest infrastructure law. This is the largest infrastructure bill up since Eisenhower did the interstate highway system. You have CHIPS, which is a semiconductor bill, which is very much about building up the kinds of jobs for middle-class people. I mean, there's a real focus in Bidenomics on building up working class and middle-class folks.
Yep. And some of the biggest investments in science that we've made for basic science research, training of engineers, et cetera, for decades.
Which is important as far as I've read.
Yeah, one could argue.
And then, of course, the biggest investment in climate, the Inflation Reduction Act, and also the first time that we're putting pharmaceuticals, we're allowing the government to negotiate on pharmaceuticals, which every other country does. We pay about, 3 times as much for pharmaceuticals as they do in Europe.
Right.
It's because their governments all negotiate and ours hasn't.
Yep.
So all of this is huge. And of course, that means insulin only for people in Medicare is what, $35 or a month or
something like that.
Something like that. But I don't think the American people they're mad about inflation. But, there's ways to go to the election. Do you know where Reagan was at this point?
I think roughly where Biden is now. I think that's the case.
I think he was a little underwater.
Yeah.
And of course, he had beat Walter Mondale, and Mondale took Minnesota.
Let us never forget.
Yeah, and D.C., I think. So there's a long way to go. And also, Trump has been, did you know, he's been indicted 4 times, and 91 charges.
Yes.
So you've got these guys going against each other probably again, and they're probably diminished in certain ways each, I think unfairly for Biden because of exactly what we're talking about, not getting credit for this stuff. And we're going to see this again, right?
Yeah. There's a surprising amount of maybe not surprising, given the poll numbers, but there's a lot of, I think, what the Obama campaign manager, David Plouffe, referred to as bedwetting that's happening among Democratic operatives and faithful, that they look at Biden's poll numbers and they look at his list of accomplishments, and it's hard to square it. And everybody comes back to this age issue, which is, I suppose, unavoidable and in some ways embedded in the title of my book, The Last Politician, something evocative about age in that. And there's a lot of panic right now that this election could plausibly slip away because voters have such a settled opinion about Joe Biden. And I think age is a huge part of it. But I also think that what you just described with inflation is a really big part of it, because the pain that people feel with inflation is a very particular type of pain.
Yeah, it's a real pain.
It hits every day. It's something that you never forget. Every time you buy a loaf of bread or pump up at the gas, you're reminded of that. And even though there's maybe nothing that Biden could do about it once the supply chain and Russia and all the COVID spending unleashed.
Well, the Recovery Act, that was way too big, way too big.
Well, it's interesting if you go back and you reconstruct what Biden's thinking was at the Recovery Act. He was thinking about
what that did. Remind people what the Recovery Act did. It kept people in their homes.
Right. Well, it's the American Rescue Plan. The Recovery Act, I think, was the Obama
what am I
stimulus.
Saying? Yes.
No, I mean, I get confused between the two all the time. But what the Rescue Plan did was it provided all of the funding for the vaccine rollout, for sequencing the different strains of the virus. It gave people a check that they were able to spend directly. It was a promise that Biden had made in Georgia in the runoff election there, and something that had been endorsed across the spectrum.
This is with huge, huge unemployment, of course, because of the pandemic.
Exactly. And it supplied money to state and local governments so that they wouldn't have to lay people off during their own fiscal crises. And Biden was haunted by what happened in 2008. He saw the number of people who got knocked out of the labor market because of the financial crisis. And he saw the scarring effect of that long-term unemployment. And for Biden, this is all very personal. His father took a social tumble at one point, was laid off from a job. And in Biden's worldview,
it's going to be okay, Joe. It's going to be okay.
Right. Work is associated with dignity.
That's my impression of Biden doing his dad.
No.
That story I've heard a lot.
Right.
We all have, yeah.
So work is associated with dignity, and his big concern is that there would be a reprise of the 2008 crisis, that it looked like if there was going to be another surge of COVID, which there was when he took office, that businesses would lay off en masse again, and those jobs might not ever come back. And so he erred on the side of overreacting. And part of the risk was that there would be some mild inflationary impact from all of that social spending. And I'm not totally convinced that there was that much inflationary impact from this one piece of spending. But certainly you look at the cumulative COVID spending across those many bills that were passed before Biden took over.
Because Trump had passed one not as large.
Right.
Or Congress had passed it and Trump had signed it. A couple.
Right.
And this was to keep people eating, and the Republicans are trying to actually cut a lot of that stuff right now. That's part of what they're threatening a government shutdown. They want to cut, but they're cutting things like WIC, women and infant children. I remember once Bernie Sanders, when he was ranking member of the Budget Committee, he came in during a caucus lunch and he gave his report. And it was like, they want to cut food stamps. He says, what kind of religion cuts food stamps? And I said, Southern Baptist. Only Harry Reid laughed. Only Harry. But so we have, what's their majority in the House? 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're going to take that back and hold the Senate and win the presidency, but we all know that. But the thing is that no matter what caused it or whatever, when inflation is at 9%, you just go, holy mackerel, I don't remember that. That's never been at that, and except during stagflation in the 70s, and people, they don't forget that either. I think it's just a visceral reaction to that. And he was president during that. Yeah.
And inflation has come down, and it's come down more quickly in the United States and in a lot of other.
Oh, yeah. And at the time when it was 9%, it was 10% and higher in Europe. I mean, inflation is higher in Europe in some part because of the war, right? Fuel and stuff there is higher,
right?
But because they can't get it from, aren't getting it from Russia. But Americans aren't going like, oh, you know what? It's high. The inflation rate is higher in Turkey, so let's give some credit to Biden. I mean, right?
No, that's not the way. That's not the way it works.
Not the way it works. And you know who knows that? The last politician.
Right. Well, he was during the midterm elections. He was obsessed with gas prices. It was the thing that he asked for most often. And so every briefing book that he took home overnight, they would stick in the gas prices. Every time he'd arrive at a meeting, he'd ask people, what's the gas price?
You know what's funny that Trump does? He goes like, when I was president, it was $2.30 a gallon. Yeah, at the bottom of at the bottom of economic activity during the pandemic, during a worldwide pandemic, the price of gas went way down. Why? Because there was no one was driving. No businesses were open and burning oil. It was like, and so I love that. But he'll say that.
Yeah.
You can guarantee that. And if you get to talk to the Biden people during the debate, prep for the debate, just have him go after him. Just chew his ass out for that. Because that's an easy chew your ass out. Yeah, we're at, Joe's not as sarcastic. Or is he?
No, he doesn't really do sarcasm.
No, he doesn't. He does weird stuff. You want me to tell my story about meeting him?
Yeah, please.
You say you like the story, but okay. So this is about, I don't know, 3 weeks before I'm seated. This is like June of 2009, and I've been in this recount. I won the recount in January, but in Minnesota, you have to wait till the Supreme Court signs off, and they just kept to delay me, kept doing legal action. So I go into the White House and I meet Joe Biden for the first time. I admired Joe always, and he comes in and he goes, "You're probably wondering how I got here. Well, let me tell you, 40 years in Washington, never promise anything you can't deliver. Never." And I go, "Okay, I got it. Never promise something. Never make a promise you can't keep." Okay. Got it. So we talk about why he says, "You're going to be seated in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, whatever it is. And when you come in, we're going to have to give you something. The administration's going to have to give you something. What do you want?" And I wish, I thought my campaign manager's there, Franny's there, and I kind of wish that my campaign manager said he might ask you this. So the only thing I can think of right away, I just go, well, I guess the extension of the North Star line, which is a commuter line it's supposed to go from Minneapolis to St. Cloud, but it only goes halfway there. And then he nods in a way that was beautiful, a beautiful nod, which was, I don't know whether or not he knew what it was, but he had spoken up in St. Cloud and promised that the administration would finish this. But the way he nodded was either he did know what it was or didn't know what it was, but he did it in such a way that I had to accept that he knew what it was. And that was a politician. That was great. I was just in awe of that nod. So I go, he goes, "How much would that cost?" And I said, $130 million. And then he says, "Well, then that's what we're going to do. When you come in, we're going to deliver that for you. We're going to say that Al Franken got this for us, for Minnesota, for St. Cloud." So I go, Jesus, that's great. And then I'm leaving, and Ron Klain, who you talk about a lot, who's the vice president's chief of staff at the time, and been Gore's chief of staff, Ron Klain steps out of his office, sees me. "Hi, Al. Hi, how'd it go?" It went great. He just promised. And he says, "How much does that cost?" And I said, $130 million. And Ron thinks it over and goes, "No. Never promise anything you can't deliver." And we never got it.
Right.
If I had been the 50th senator, Democratic senator, then I would have gotten it probably, right?
Yeah. If you were Joe Manchin.
If I was Joe Manchin, yes, that's what I'm saying. Or Cinema, on the infrastructure bill, then I would have gotten anything that I would have wanted. Yeah, but no, that was never promise anything you can't deliver.
Hearing you tell that story, I've heard you tell that story before and laughed my head off at it. It's so spot on. And I think I'd actually heard Biden in the White House the day after you told me that story say exactly that line, "Never promise something that you can't deliver." And I had to call you immediately afterwards to laugh about that. But I think you're getting at something in the title, The Last Politician. There's something about politics and politicians. One of the reasons why they never get respect is that there is this sense that they're inauthentic, that they'll say one thing to you on the stump and then they'll go and they'll do something else when they're behind closed doors. And that nod of the head that you just described, kind of the ultimate politician's gesture, which is one where there's like this seeming assent, but not really.
His assent, though, was yes. The word, yeah, we'll give you that when you come back. That was his assent. I'm not, but you're right. I mean, he's a politician, and thank God, because he won, and we need him to win again because the stakes are so fucking high.
Right.
But on the other hand, as you write the book, you also see often he stands by his own, what he actually firmly believes in. Even on abortion, being this Catholic, real go to mass Catholic, he wasn't, with Elizabeth Warren, he hesitated And in an odd way, the way he hesitated on going over, whatever, however you want to characterize it, it helped.
Yeah. Yeah. His instincts on that were spot on, that he understood that if he made himself the issue at that moment, then his policy would be the issue, not the radicalism of the Supreme Court, not the Republican Party that made the Supreme Court that made Dobbs possible. And his instinct was, let them hoist themselves on their own petard, and I'm not going to do anything to distract the public from that. It wasn't emotionally satisfying in the moment, but in the end, it was politically
He took
correct.
a lot of flack for that. He took a lot of flack.
A huge amount. But there was also this parallel story that's happening where he was wrestling with his own personal beliefs. I mean, I think part of Joe Biden is stuck in the 80s and 90s as it relates to some of the culture war issues. And sometimes there's wisdom that comes from that, where he knows that there are places that the Democratic Party shouldn't go because it would be politically self-destructive. But on an issue like abortion, I think he was stuck in old frameworks about, trimesters, and instead of thinking about the utter radicalism of the decision and everything that it opened up. And it took the case of that 10-year-old girl from Ohio who traveled to Indianapolis and ended up getting sued. That was the thing that radicalized him, where he was able to say, okay, this is bananas. And like whatever issues of conscience I might have, they disappear in the face of this decision because it's so damn extreme.
But also remember that he pushed Obama on same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And, so.
Yeah, no, it's true. On those issues of sexual freedom, for a guy of his age, he's willing to go in pretty progressive direction.
Oh, that's another bullshit story, I think. Okay, tell me what you think. He tells a story about him and his dad in the car. Do you know this story?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like he's a kid. He's like a kid, right? And he and his dad, so this is like 1955. Okay. So he tells a story like, Dad and I in a car, and we see two men in another car kissing. And my dad says to me, I look at him like, what's that? He goes, it's love, Joe. It's love. Now, come on. Does the dad say that?
Oh, in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1952, there were leather bars on every corner, and like I'm sure, I'm sure it checks out.
Okay, well so every once in a while he does that, but then on the other hand, there are, just throughout this him standing on his own values and being a little stubborn in the right way.
Yeah. No, it's true.
You know what the biggest contrast to me, the idea that these two guys run against each other again. And if you look at your book, your book is very comprehensive on how each piece of legislation gets done and how all these different technocratic. There's one story I love, which is him checking on a plane in Europe that's going to deliver infant formula.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine Trump. Trump just feels like he just watched TV, and that was kind of it. And then he watched TV and developed his talking points from watching Fox. That was mainly his work as president.
Yeah.
And you see Biden for all this, he's so old. My God, the guy's working constantly.
Yeah. It's actually something I didn't really know about Biden before embarking on this book. I kind of thought of him as a fairly superficial politician who would he knew a lot about foreign policy, but I didn't think about him as a wonk per se.
Well, you make the point that he got caught, that plagiarism thing way back, Neil Kinnock's thing about being a minor or something, which I don't understand how he did that, but but you write in the book that since then he is just make sure that he knows what he's talking about on everything.
Yeah.
And this guy is, and also I'm very impressed with the questions he asks people. That is from this unbelievable years and years and decades of experience, as well as instinct. And you see both at work all the time.
One of the questions that he asks all the time in meetings is this very practical question about government, which is, all right, you're proposing this benefit, but how are people going to know about the benefit? How are people going to experience that benefit? The really nitty gritty questions about implementation that he tends to ask. And they're often questions that have been ignored by a lot of policymakers. The other types of questions that he likes to ask are about how a certain policy will play in a certain place. So he needs to get detail for narrative. He's a storyteller. As you say about that story about the 1950s and Scranton with Love is Love, like sometimes not always the most accurate storyteller, but when it comes to sitting down and talking to a senator, he likes to know, all right, what is the North Star line? Those types of very specific questions. Okay, we're going to extend the American Rescue Plan to rescue farmers in this state. So where will that really manifest itself? When John Tester comes in to talk to me about this, like what can I tell him about Montana that will make it persuasive for him to fall in line behind me? And the staffers who don't make it in Biden's universe are the ones who aren't able to think narratively, who don't share that gritty, practical view of politics.
He has staff that's been with him for years and years, including Tony Blinken. Klain has been with him. These are. And to some degree, I think these are the technocrats that some complain about, but you actually need people who know what levers to pull and how to get things done
Yeah. Biden is an Irish politician, Irish American politician who grew up in the 60s and couldn't help but stick the Kennedys up on a pedestal. And I think like the Kennedys family was always the atomic unit of politics for him. And the staff who stuck with him have almost this familial like relationship with him. Ron Klain started working with Biden when he was 28, way back in the 80s. Same is true for Mike Donilon. Blinken's been with him for decades. And you can go on down the list. And one of the common qualities that they have is they're not pure technocrats. They're people who can tend to bridge the political policy divide. And which is what makes it even more perplexing that Biden's presidency, which has been successful on policy grounds, has done a not terrific job of bridging the politics policy divide.
And again, I just, I don't want to pound it, but when you see 10% inflation, you don't care who's to blame or how it happened. I want to ask you about, and we've talked about this, Afghanistan, Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because Afghanistan was a debacle. They got a lot of people out. They did an amazing job once they fucked up and got a tremendous number of people out and did an amazing job after that. But the military intelligence, the intelligence going into this, and I noticed that you write about this, that you could tell that Biden wanted to leave.
Oh, yeah. He promised he would leave.
Well, yeah, and Trump had put him in the position where Trump had negotiated with the Taliban, not with the Taliban and the Kabul government.
Yep.
But with the Taliban on a date, and first Biden moved the date to September 11th, which I'll never understand.
Nope.
That was weird. But then it became August something. They got persuaded to change it.
Yes.
But you can tell that he wanted to leave, and we were there 20 years, and I think that he was always against expanding that war, to build up what was the surge, in 10. But he kind of talks to Milley and talks to others as if, no, I want to hear what you have to say. And you see Milley kind of saying what? It was kind of like, I know we're going to leave, right?
Milley is somebody who studies military history, and I think he respected the strategy that was at work in the way that Biden did it. And Milley remembered the Obama administration. He was a young guy working in the basement of the Pentagon or younger guy working in the basement of the Pentagon, he saw the way in which the Pentagon brass was trying to jam Obama on Afghanistan. And he didn't like it then. And then coming out of Lafayette Square and all the talk about a coup and the like with the Trump administration, he was determined to demonstrate that civilian rule was alive and well. So he was never gonna undermine Biden in the decision-making process on Afghanistan. But I think that the question that you're asking at core is, why did things go so badly wrong? And there are a couple answers. One is that nobody predicted that things would go so badly wrong so quickly. People thought that it would go badly wrong, but that was off in the future. And I think that is a somewhat exonerating excuse. But on the other hand, it just is common sense that you take the American military out of Afghanistan very quickly. This army and government that had depended on the American army wasn't going to be very sturdy. And I think we just misjudged.
The contrast here is the military intelligence, the intelligence on Ukraine is sort of spectacularly good.
Yes.
And the intelligence in Afghanistan is spectacularly bad, because what happened in Afghanistan was actually very predictable, which is once we say we're leaving, what regional tribal commander is going to fight the Taliban?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they all just caved. And so the Taliban are in Kabul like before you know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between military intelligence in Afghanistan and the military intelligence that served us so well in Ukraine and made Biden's leadership so great in putting together this coalition?
Yeah, I'm not an intelligence expert, but from what I gather, with Russia, we were able to intercept the actual war plan. So it was we have Russia wired. Maybe there's a lot of sloppiness on the Russian end in terms of the way in which they share information with one another. But it's also, we fought a Cold War with Russia. Our intelligence infrastructure as it relates to Russia was really good. With Afghanistan, there was decades of happy talk that was kind of baked into military and intelligence assessments of what was happening in Afghanistan. To understand that the Afghan army was going to collapse wasn't a matter of just intercepting a document. It required piecing together analysis. And a couple things made that harder. One is as we were withdrawing, we had fewer eyes and ears on the ground in Afghanistan. Another problem was COVID, where our soldiers stopped going out into the field to have meetings with their Afghan counterparts. And so they would conduct meetings over Zoom. And everybody knows that a Zoom meeting is worse than a normal face-to-face meeting. And that's especially true when it comes to collecting good information about an army. A commander could tell you all sorts of nice things, but then when you're out there inspecting the situation on the ground, you see things for yourself that would be clarifying.
Commander, I want to ask you about Commander.
Yes.
That's the Biden family German Shepherd.
Yes.
Who has bitten in the White House, right?
Yep.
10 people.
Yes. And Al,
do
you view this as an impeachable offense?
No. I just don't know why Commander isn't enjoying, and I mean enjoying being on a farm. I don't mean you tell the kids we're sending Commander to a farm.
Because the U.S. government doesn't have an extradition treaty to the farm.
So what is that? What is having a German Shepherd that bites?
All I can say is Biden didn't fire anybody over Afghanistan. He certainly isn't going to fire a commander for crimes against humanity.
Okay, that gives you no idea what this book is like.
Thank you for taking us down that path. This is a really selling interview, Al.
Well, that was a facile response.
Do you want to go deeper on the commander issue?
No. No, I don't want to make you do that. Let's talk about some other stuff you want to talk about. Oh, you know what? So I want to talk about fake news, because I think one of the first interviews you did was on World Without Mind, which was your first book?
My second book.
Second book, okay. We live in a world that is just without mind, to quote your book, of this was about social media and
yes, the plague of big technology.
Yeah, and then there's also Fox and but we now sort of, when Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts, right? There's going to be alternative facts. What she was saying is, well, there's fake news, therefore we have to have these alternative facts because the facts you're getting are fake.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can't believe anything anymore. No one can believe anything. World Without Mind.
Yes.
To plug your book.
Yes, thank you. Available in paperback.
But they should buy The Last Politician first.
Absolutely.
Okay. Especially right now, right at the beginning there.
Yeah.
But it's a great companion for the campaign for Democrats who want to, talk about all the achievements, which are amazing. But let's talk about the political world we live in terms of information.
Yeah. So I could tell you a story, which is that the first excerpt from my book published in the Atlantic was about Afghanistan. And then some guy also got a hold of my book from an independent bookstore and started to mine it for clickbait. And Fox News started to get very titillated by my book, which is, it's in a lot of ways an admiring portrait of what Biden has accomplished, even as it points out his flaws and some of his shortcomings.
Which is a strength of the book.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. But so this guy, Jesse Waters on Fox News, this wannabe Tucker Carlson with an impressive helmet of hair, starts talking about just making stuff up about what I've written in my book. He says in the story about Kabul, he starts talking about how Joe Biden wanted to build parking lots in Kabul in the middle of the evacuation and that his aides were laughing at him. And I was like, whoa, he's attributing this to me and to my book. It's like, did I actually write anything like that? What the hell is he? And I went back and I started to reread, and I did write about a parking lot in Kabul. But what I reported was that Biden was poring over a map of the city, looking for a place that refugees could gather so that they could be escorted to the airport. It was nothing remotely like what he was describing. He was just making up this absurd story, attributing it to me, and arguing that even like this libtard reporter Frank Foer is can't help but report that Biden's aides were laughing at his lack of mental acuity, which was complete and total crap. But that's the world where we live in, where stories can materialize, with the slimmest connection back to reality.
That's pretty fucking slim.
So slim that it doesn't exist.
Maybe you could sue him for $700 million.
I like my odds.
Well, yeah. So that's the challenge of this. You're a journalist. You have journalistic principles. You write a journalistic book about the Biden administration. That's kind of our side. And then you have alternative facts.
This is even happening with the age question, which I know is like a legitimate question. And obviously, a lot of people have doubts about this. But Fox has constructed this Sleepy Joe narrative, which is just not. That's really not tethered to the reality of Joe Biden. You can ask questions about how he's going to age over the course of the next 6 years and whether it makes sense for the Democrats to nominate him as a candidate against Trump, given all that's at stake in the election. But he's just not Sleepy Joe. I mean, the whole book documents the ways in which he's been an activist in the weeds, completely engaged, sometimes overly engaged president.
And that's just who he is. Did you read Richard Ben Kramer's?
Of course. I mean, it's one of the greatest works of political journalism ever written. And is this incredible portrait of Joe Biden that is the Rosetta Stone for understanding Joe Biden. And one of the great mysteries to me is that the political press corps treats Biden like a boring figure. But anybody who's ever read Richard Ben Cramer knows that Biden is...
What it takes, is that's...
Yeah, what it takes, yeah.
Yeah.
Knows that Biden is fascinating and that everything you need to know about Biden in some respects grows out of Richard Ben Cramer. People evolve as they age, but they don't become new people. That Joe Biden, who's so status conscious, who has so many different insecurities, he's still around and kicking. It's part of the reason why he keeps pushing forward. It's the reason that he keeps running for president, running for re-election, because he still has this thing that he wants to prove to the world.
Yeah, he is the opposite of that guy, of that Sleepy Joe. And they actually edit tape to make him look like they do, nasty stuff, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the world we live in. But you've added a lot of value to the world we live in with all your journalism, but particularly this one, The Last Politician, which is this is a first draft of history. Is that right?
It's very much a first draft of history. I mean, I think
once I asked Bob Woodward only because I wanted him. You know how he says Republican and reporter? So he did one of his books on the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan, one of his books, and he gave an interview to my radio show, and I was like the last show he did. So I was just mad at him. And then if you were interested in his book at all, you'd heard an interview with him. So I just wanted to say, now, are you more a historian? Is this the first draft of history? Are you more a historian or a reporter? So that he would just say, reporter. And I told my audience before, I knew he wouldn't be listening before he came on. So I just said, I'm going to make him say Republican and reporter as much as possible. But this is a first draft of history that you've written, right?
I would say I'm more of a reporter.
Well, you're a great one. And the book is The Last Politician. The author, Frank Foer, has been speaking with us for the last 45, 50 minutes. And I recommend this book very highly to my listeners.
It's so nice of you to say, Al.
Well, as insincere as that sounded, that part.
Hey, I thought it sounded sincere. Maybe my reportorial skills are not what they should be.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.